but the CIA and MI6 and the local neo-Nazis staged a coup.
In this interview, Jim Rickards provides insights into Russia's objectives in attacking Ukraine. He outlines Russia's desire for Ukraine to remain neutral and not join NATO, emphasizing historical precedents of neutrality in countries like Finland, Austria, and Switzerland. Rickards argues that the United States' actions, such as pushing for NATO membership and supporting a coup in Ukraine, have provoked Russia to react, leading to events like the annexation of Crimea. He criticizes U.S. policymakers for their lack of understanding of Russian history and military strategy, highlighting Russia's resilience and military capabilities. Rickards suggests that the U.S. approach to Russia is ideologically driven and lacks a nuanced understanding of geopolitical dynamics.
Well, they've stated their objectives. It's not a mystery. They want a demilitarization, militarization, denazification, because it's run by a lot of Nazi sympathizers. Not join NATO, obviously. And well, those are the three main objective: militarization, denazification, no membership. Oh, and then neutrality. We have many examples of that. And Finland was neutral throughout the entire Cold War until very recently has done. NATO was probably a mistake, but until then, they've been neutral. Austria was neutral during most of the Cold War. That's why Vienna was such a hub for spies, and like the third man with Orson Welles. But, she was technically neutral. They ultimately westernized, but so there is a Switzerland maintains neutrality. So there's plenty of precedent for that. And they wanted Ukraine to be neutral. Now, why did they attack when they did this? The SMR special military operation. The United States provoked the war. The United States spent 14 years poking a stick in Russia's eye, and Russia eventually reacted. But you go back to George W. Bush 2008, the Bucharest Declaration. He said, Ukraine and Georgia should join NATO, that we should start the process of letting Ukraine and Georgia join NATO. 4 months later, Putin invaded Georgia. You're not paying attention. You said that you want them in NATO. Putin says, no, we did invade Georgia. And they took half the country and neutralized it. And Georgia obviously does not belong to NATO. So then flash forward to 2014, CIA and MI6 provoked one of these color revolutions. I forget what color it was. Might have been purple, but there was the Maidan Square demonstration of bear in mind. At the time, Ukraine had a duly elected president. They had an election and it was fair by all accounts. And he was pro-Russian, fair to say, but he was talking to the EU, trying to do a trade deal with the EU, also doing a trade deal with Russia, tilting to Russia. But, trying to play it down the middle of Ukraine politics is a tough game. But the CIA and the MI6 and the local neo-Nazis staged a coup, and they drove him out. And he killed a lot of innocent civilians in my town square. And then the President Poroshenko got on a plane and flew to Moscow, kind of had to run for his life. And then we installed a puppet. So a couple of months after that, Putin took over Crimea. So what part of invasion do you not understand? And that was every time the United States, and really the Europeans are vassals at this point. Every time the US and its vassals provoke Russia, either by saying Georgia and Ukraine to join NATO, we're staging a coup and sending the president, kind of running for his life. Putin would react by invading to you invaded Georgia. And you've had a Crimea, which is now part of Russia, historically part of our ship. But it was considered part of Ukraine. And we kept going. I mean, they impeached Donald Trump for a phone call. A phone call was Zelensky and he gets impeached. Now you got, Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley and Joe Biden, all the other warmongers going to Kyiv, they don't get impeached. But somehow, Trump makes one phone call, and that was impeach him. So that was just the warmonger element. The State Department, and now you're Tony Blinken, the National Security Advisor. Sorry, Tony Blinken, Secretary of State Jake Silva, National Security Advisor Victoria Nuland, Deputy Secretary of State there. They're the inner core of the warmongers. But there are plenty of them in Washington. No shortage. They just want war. They don't understand Russia. They don't understand history. They had this notion that, well, if we can just keep pushing, provoke a war, We can deplete Russia's military capability, inflict major casualties on Russia, create dissension in Moscow. The Russians just, they don't train, they just sit there and drink vodka. The generals are incompetent. The whole thing will fall apart. There'll be an uprising of Western elites in Moscow, and they'll overthrow Putin, and we can get back to looting the place. None of that happens. None of that happened. They completely misunderstood basically everything about Russia. Putin, his power base is not the oligarchs. Who actually doesn't like the oligarchs has to put up with them. And he's told them, you can keep your money, but keep out of politics. And he put a few of them in jail, just says to prove his point. But he's never relied on the oligarchs. Putin's base as the military intelligence community, the Orthodox Church and everyday Russians, that has not been impacted at all. Their economy's doing fine. Guess's arsenals are depleted, not Russia. Ours were the ones running out of Patriots, we're the ones that are running out of 155mm shells. We're the ones who can't make the cruise missiles fast enough. We're the ones who don't have enough drones, etc. Russia has all that and more because they put their economy on a war footing. Putin is more popular than ever. He's going to win re-election as president next month. And so they got everything wrong, which means that they are ideologically driven, they're not good students of history. They don't understand the Russian way of war. Just study the Battle of Kursk, study what happened on the Eastern Front. In World War II, the Wehrmacht went in and they killed 5 million Russians, and they were on the outskirts of Moscow. They invaded Stalingrad, they had Leningrad today, Petersburg, surrounded, and they were starving them out. And it looked like very close to a complete victory. But what they didn't understand is they killed 5 million Russians. But then the Russians said 5 million more, and 5 million more, meaning the Russia had reserves and what's called strategic depth and population. And all of a sudden, the Wehrmacht, they suffered, 5 million casualties, but they were done. They didn't have Germany's much smaller country. They didn't have 5 million more than Russia went all the way to Berlin. But that didn't happen overnight. It took 2.5 years. And in those 2.5 years, the Russian strategy was kind of an envelopment. They would stop your advance, but they would kind of fight a war of attrition, but they would surround you in the meantime. And only when they had pretty much annihilated you and surrounding you would they go in and basically kill everybody. And then, maybe a few escaped to the west. But they did that over and over. And it took 2.5 years. So anyone who studied that would have said, the Russians have, practically inexhaustible reserves, enormous industrial capacity, the discipline to go on a war footing, and they're very slow but very methodical. And they always win. That's what you would have concluded the Victorian Newlands and Tony Blinken to the world were our intellectual lightweight. I mean, she went to Brown, but that's the bachelor's degree.